Alright, guys, this is your tired teacher again for probably the last time. Thank the Lord. We're finally finishing up content today. I can hear the choir of angels singing hallelujah. Really, I'm so done with this school year. Oh my God. Uh, Let's be done with this. Okay. So, today what we got is foreign policy with Bush and Clinton. So we got to wrap up the 90s foreign policy, and then we're going to cover the presidencies of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. So let's go ahead and fly through this. We got our final push towards EOC and AP, so here we go. It's going to be weird today, guys. I'm going to switch between two different PowerPoints. Yeah, dude, it's that time of year again. Usually I just John Green it with Crash Course for like Obama and Bush, but hey, we're actually getting a lecture this time. So, all right, let's go with this. Now, foreign policy. We got a couple things to deal with in the 90s. So, here's what we got going on. Nicaragua's still an issue. So, the Sandinistas were voted out in 90, and we've got Violeta Barrios Chamorro, who was elected president. She's the first female president in any Central American nation. So, step in the right direction. In Germany, since the Berlin Wall is, pretty much knocked down in 1990, the entire country is finally able to unite. For the first time since, World War II. And so now, instead of having East Germany and West Germany, we have just Germany joining us. But the big thing for President Bush and his foreign policy is going to be the war in Iraq. The Persian Gulf War, actually. So, here's what happens. Now, Iraq invades Kuwait. This happens in August 1990. Saddam Hussein's in charge of Iraq at this time, and he wants to, have more of a price increase with oil with the other OPEC partners to kind of pay for the debt that he incurred with his war with Iran, which occurred over a 10-year span. So the other Arab nations refuse to cooperate, and he's going to accuse Kuwait of undercutting Iraq's petroleum revenues and stealing from the oil field that lies in the border between Iraq and Kuwait. So Kuwait offers a concession to fix this, but Hussein's like, nope. He sends troops to invade Kuwait and try to bring in Kuwait as part of Iraq. So Kuwait's army flees along with the king of Kuwait. And of course the UN is looking at this, they're like, whoa, The world is outraged by what Saddam Hussein does. Iraq also condemns the Arab League and the United Nations. So the UN Security Council is going to be like, okay, here's some resolutions. And the first one is a non-recognition of, what Iraq just did, trying to bring in Kuwait under annexation. So ultimately, the UN's going to be like, okay, let's send the coalition forces out there to try to liberate Kuwait and, send Saddam Hussein back to Iraq, pretty much. His forces. So here's what makes up the coalition troops. Remember, it's the United Nations, like almost every freaking nation in the world. So we've got Afghanistan, Argentina, Australia, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Belgium, Canada, Czechoslovakia, which existed at that time, Denmark, Egypt, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Honduras, Italy, Kuwait, Morocco, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Niger, Norway, Oman, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, South Korea, Spain, Syria, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the U.S. So, President Bush is totally on board with this. General Norman Schwarzkopf, one of our generals, is in charge of the coalition forces. And here's what we got. This is Operation Desert Storm. So, when we're looking at a timeline here, this is what goes on. Persian Gulf War, the Gulf War, occurs between 1990 and 1991 because in August, Iraq starts it off by invading Kuwait, right? So then we start Operation Desert Shield, which turns into Operation Desert Storm, and we're going to start like the bombing raids and stuff. It's the air phase that begins. Now, in January, Iraq is going to make a massive mess with an oil slick in the Persian Gulf, and they ignite it. So it's going to like set fire to 700 oil wells in Kuwait. And I mean, when oil wells catch fire, it's really hard to like get them to shut off. So in late February, the Allied ground force assault is going to begin. And by February 28th, it's the end of fighting. So really, this is more of like an air war, like with bombs being launched and stuff. Not really like a ground war. So this is probably like our first like truly like modern war in the sense of like how current warfare occurs. So this is totally a different war than what we've seen in previous ones. So by April 6th, Iraq is officially accepting the ceasefire terms, and in total, 200 Iraqis die. Hundreds of civilians, 148 of the UN allies were killed as well. So here's what we're talking about as far as equipment lost by both sides during the war. The coalition loses a whole bunch. But yeah. The coalition does not lose a whole bunch. Iraq loses a whole bunch. That's right. They destroy a whole bunch of Iraq's equipment. So that is the Persian Gulf War. That is under President H.W. Bush. All right. Now, something that happens under Clinton is Somalia. So Somalia, there's a civil war going on in 1991. There's a lot of famine in this country. And 300,000 Somalis are going to die of starvation between 1991 and 1992. The UN is unable to get food to the people because when they're sending food out there, the convoys are looted and the relief workers are assaulted by, warring gangs and tribes there. So the UN asks for volunteers to aid in securing the roads, the airfields, other key locales where supplies can, freely go about. So President Bush is only in office for one more month. He sends troops there. And more so, President Clinton's going to be the one overseeing Somalia. U.S. troops are going to remain there until 1994. And the UN remains there until 95. So that's what happens with Operation Restore Hope in Somalia. Now, when it comes to the Soviets and and their war with Afghanistan, this honestly plays a part in the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is from 89 to 90, and what we do is we help aid the Afghanistan people, in particular the Taliban. So we'll come back to that right now when we talk about 9/11. But here's what went on with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Reagan largely takes the credit for this. But it was a perfect storm of a whole bunch of things. Now, economics. There's going to be zero economic growth by the 80s in the Soviet Union. And there's a black market that starts up for consumer goods. There's an inability to produce enough grain and food because remember Reagan put sanctions on the grain and stuff. Like he undid like some of the stuff that Nixon did for the grain trade and all that. They had inferior consumer goods and poor use of resources as well. So when it comes to military spending, there's between 15 to 25% of their GDP in the Soviet Union was spent on the military compared to ours, which is only 5 to 7%. So they're spending way more of the money that they have as a nation as, military spending. Plus, there's a lot of political corruption that was going on in the Soviet Union at that time. There wasn't really a checks and balance system. So the political officials, lived like kings pretty much. And there's a lot of corruption happening. So really, there needs to be a change in the system. And of course, probably the biggest thing is the ideology. Because, with Gorbachev bringing in glasnost and perestroika, that definitely goes against the ideology of, the Soviet Union as far as like communism with their command economy. Because remember, elements of capitalism are being introduced with perestroika. And with glasnost, we're bringing in elements of free speech. So, with the command economy, they're supposed to control all aspects of production. The state's supposed to control that through quotas. So really, this is going to keep the individual initiative and innovation at a low, and it's going to hurt the economy. And so when Gorbachev does introduce glasnost and perestroika, he's kind of like ushering out the old elements of communism and bringing in new elements of capitalism and free speech. So with nationalism, 50% of the population was not even Russian. Because remember, there's a lot of satellite nations that are embedded within the Soviet Union, and they wanted their independence already for their various ethnic groups and their regions. So this is what we see. This was the Soviet Union before the collapse. Now, when the Soviet Union breaks up, remember all the satellite nations are going to break apart from the Russian base right there. And all these nations that we see right here, Moldova, the Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, East Germany, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Albania, Romania, and Bulgaria were all in this communist bloc controlled by the Soviet Union. So all of them going to be free. Now, there is some unrest going on in Yugoslavia with Serbia. So, the Serbian president is going to block the Croatian leader from assuming the presidency. So, Croatia and Slovenia are going to secede from Yugoslavia. So, the Yugoslav army moves into both areas, and there's this ethnic cleansing that happens. It's just genocide, okay, in Croatia until the UN steps in and they supervise that ceasefire in January of 92. But by that point, 25,000 are dead. Macedonia, which is in the area as well, declares independence in September of 91 because, they have some unrest with Greece. So there's 5 years of war that happens between Bosnia and Herzegovina. They secede from Yugoslavia in 92. So here's Yugoslavia now broken up into different areas: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and Montenegro. So Yugoslavia is no more. All right, when it comes to peace in the Middle East, Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, we remember Yasser Arafat being the leader of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Yitzhak Rabin is the Israeli prime minister. These two come to peace terms. Remember, they had been fighting all through the 80s and prior to that. So with the Oslo Accords that are signed in D.C., Clinton supervising them, basically brings an end to 45 years of fighting between the two areas. So this agreement is going to settle some Israeli redeployment from parts of the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip, establishes a provisional Palestinian self-rule government, and so they're finally going to agree to recognize each other publicly. So this is an important step in the right direction for peace in the Middle East. It's only a temporary peace, however, but it's an important point in changing Palestinian and Israeli relations. So it's an important thing. Okay. In the 90s, the World Trade Center is bombed. It's not like what we see in 9/11, though. This is a smaller scale, but we're starting to see terrorist organizations attack various areas. And in 93, it's the World Trade Center. So there's a bomb in a van that explodes in the parking garage. And this is in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. It kills 6 people and injures 1,000, but it produces millions of dollars worth of damage in the building. So the person who takes credit for this, Ramzi Youssef, he claims that he wanted to kill 250,000 people. So there are 6 Islamic extremist conspirators that are convicted of this in 97 and 98, and they each receive prison sentences of 240 years each. Other stuff happening in the 90s? Well, in Rwanda, we have some mass genocide as well in 94, when 800,000 people are massacred when the Hutus turn against the Tutsis. But we're not doing anything about this. 800,000 people. And we just kind of turn a blind eye to it. This is insane. All right. What else is going on in the 90s? Well, remember we had the Oklahoma City bombing, World Trade Center bombing we just talked about. There's a bombing that happens in Olympic Park in Atlanta, Georgia in the summer of 96, during the Summer Olympics, which causes the death of 2 people and injures 110 others. So, plus we have a terrorist attack in 98 conducted on the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya by al-Qaeda. So, more stuff that happens. There's a truck explosion outside the U.S. military's barracks, I believe, in Khobar Towers. It's a building in Saudi Arabia. Kills 19 military personnel, wounds 515. And in Kosovo. Kosovo is part of Yugoslavia. And so when it split up, it was absorbed into Serbia. But there's going to be some fighting going on here. The Kosovo Liberation Army wants independence in 97, so it's going to begin killing Serbian government officials. So in 98, President Milosevic sent troops to take control of the region. Fighting's going to escalate since the government sponsored killings of Albanians. NATO is going to intervene and try to negotiate a peace settlement, but it's unsuccessful. So they send troops in, air troops, for 78 days. The UN sponsors a peace settlement that's officially ratified in June 99 after that. So that is the end of foreign policy for the 90s. Like I said, guys, it's going to be weird. We're going to shift gears now and talk about President Bush and President Obama. So, here's some background on President Bush. This leads us into the 2000s now. Now, President Bush is the son of George H.W. Bush. We just talked about him. He is, he wasn't the one that Bush thought would be, out of his kids, he was the one that Bush thought would be president. Bush thought it would be Jeb Bush. But instead, it's George W. here. So he goes to Yale and Harvard. He joins the Texas Air National Guard. He owns the Texas Rangers, but sold them. And he was governor of Texas from 95 to 2000. So there's going to be some controversy surrounding his election. And it deals with the results, obviously. So what happens is Bush runs on the campaign that he's a compassionate conservative. But in 2000, Gore is going to win the popular vote. But when it comes down to the electoral vote in Florida, it's too close a call. So there's going to be a machine recount at first. Bush is declared winner by only 537 votes. So then Gore is going to be like, no, I want a hand recount. So the hand recount begins. But Bush is going to sue in the state of Florida to stop that hand recount. So this case eventually goes up to the Supreme Court, and they rule in the Supreme Court case of Bush versus Gore that the hand recounts are unconstitutional. So in essence, the Supreme Court handed the election to George W. Bush by siding with him in that court case. So Bush wins the Florida electoral votes and he becomes president. Now, what happens during Bush's presidency, one of the first things he has to deal with is terrorism. So terrorism, as defined, is the use of violence by non-governmental groups against civilians to achieve a political goal. So in 88, Osama bin Laden is going to form the organization called al-Qaeda, whose goal was to basically remove Western influence from Muslim society. What we mean by Western influence is like basically the free world, Western Europe, United States, so on and so forth. So al-Qaeda is going to conduct terrorist attacks on U.S. targets. The World Trade Center bombing that happened in 93 is part of theirs. The American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania that were bombed in 98. The USS Cole that's bombed in 2000. And the biggest attack that they take credit for is September 11th, 2001. So, on September 11th, 2001, al-Qaeda hijacks 4 U.S. planes. 2 are going to fly into the World Trade Center towers, the North Tower and the South Tower. 1 plane flies into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Another plane crash lands in Pennsylvania, and they thought that that plane was probably headed towards either the Capitol or the White House. But the passengers on board resisted the terrorists, and that's why it crash landed in Pennsylvania instead. So in these attacks on September 11th, over 3,000 people are killed, and this still remains the deadliest attack that we've seen on U.S. soil. So the U.S. is quickly turning its attention to the Taliban in Afghanistan and al-Qaeda. So they believe that the Taliban was harboring Osama bin Laden inside of Afghanistan. And, well, al-Qaeda is the group that Osama bin Laden is in charge of. So this attack begins the global war on terror. And so with the war on terror, this is what we're talking about. There's going to be several governmental agencies that are set up. The TSA, which they're the people who like do the security checks at the airports and stuff. Reason why we got to like take off our shoes, go through the screening process and all of that. So they're created to prevent another terrorist attack, hijacking. The Department of Homeland Security is created as well to protect the U.S. from all threats. So it overlooks, defense on our home soil, essentially. The Patriot Act is passed, and this is very controversial. It's going to expand the government's laws, of enforcement and monitoring powers. So wiretapping, checking out what books we check out from the library, internet searches that we do. A lot of privacy issues come up with the Patriot Act. So just be aware of that. You guys are going to cover it more with government, but it's still pretty controversial. Now, the war in Afghanistan, and then the war in Iraq, which we got involved in that one because we heard that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. We didn't really have proof of it. We still went in anyways. So those are the two wars that are going to rage on through the early 2000s. The U.S. is going to increase. There's going to be an increase of attacks on Muslim, Sikhs, people suspected of being from the Middle East. So there's a lot of hate on, people of Middle Eastern descent at this time. We're going to detain people at Guantanamo Bay for military tribunals. They're held in secrecy. Well, to hold military tribunals held in secrecy. And there's a lot of negativity surrounding the detention of these people at Guantanamo Bay. People we suspect are being terrorists. So as far as domestic policy goes, Bush's key things that we have here is no child left behind, which is pretty much the reason why you guys take the EOC. Yeah, buddy. This is why. So, with no child left behind, Bush is trying to close the achievement gap between kids with different socioeconomic statuses. So, yes, there is going to be more federal funding for low-income schools. But with this unfunded mandate, no child left behind, you guys have to perform better in your state exams. It's not just math and science tests. State of Texas, we have EOC, we have STAR, right? Which is English, math, science, and history. And this is high-stakes testing. What we mean by that is that, well, you got to pass it to graduate. That is a high-stakes test. So we're using this to measure data, to measure school performance and whatnot. But really what we're finding is that it's kind of worse on education. There's a lot of videos on this, guys. If you want more information, go ahead and look it up. Okay, more about Bush and domestic policy. So this is a major hurricane. It happens in 2005. It's Hurricane Katrina. And this strikes Louisiana. But the Florida coast, Alabama, Mississippi, and parts of Texas are also affected by Hurricane Katrina. But when the levees break in New Orleans and the floodwaters come rushing in through the city of New Orleans, especially in the poor, low-lying areas of New Orleans, about 1,800 people are going to die because of this hurricane. 108 billion in property damage. This is one of the most deadliest hurricanes ever in the United States. I mean, this rivals like the Galveston hurricane in 1900 in damage. Harvey surpasses this, but I mean, in deaths, yeah, Katrina is going to be up there. So the Bush administration is criticized for this because they're very slow to respond to this crisis. And, Bush is going to say, hey, Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, manage this. But those two entities didn't really do much. And a lot of the people in New Orleans, had to stay in these terrible conditions for a while. There's images of bodies floating around in New Orleans and nothing's being done about it. I mean, it's terrible what happened in Hurricane Katrina. But probably the most damaging thing to Bush's presidency is towards the end of his presidency, the Great Recession. So, in 2007, we're starting to see the housing market collapse, and banks were holding on to millions worth in mortgages. These mortgages were those type of mortgages that we tried to prevent during the Great Depression by passing stuff like the Glass-Steagall Act that Reagan overturned parts of that, and Clinton overturned the rest of that. So banks were using borrowers' money to go ahead and invest in the stock market again, which was a big no-no during the Great Depression. That's one of the things that caused it. Also, the mortgages that were being handed out to people were variable rate mortgages, so they would have balloon payments eventually, which the people who had them could not afford them anymore. So the last thing the bank wants to do is sit on property. They're not making any money off of it. So because banks aren't making any money off of all this stuff, they're going to start to collapse. Investment firms that held these mortgage-backed securities also failed. And what we mean by mortgage-backed securities are stocks backed up by mortgages. Again, investing in the stocks by these banks. Banks are going to stop lending money because, well, they're not trusting anybody anymore as far as like loans go. So really, it's a big collapse. And had nothing been done, this probably would have been worse than the Great Depression. But there are certain things that happen that are going to prevent a total collapse of our economy. So this is one of the things is the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. It's authorized by the Secretary of Treasury to spend $700 billion to prevent banks and large corporations from failing. So this is going to be criticized because people are going to see this as like a bailout bill. Basically, we're giving money to the people who caused this thing with no strings attached. Yeah, that's going to go over well. But by this point in time, President Obama is going to get elected. Bush had already completed his 2 terms, and John McCain, who runs for the Republicans, loses to Barack Obama because of, well, these economic woes. So Barack Obama is our first African American president of the United States. And he goes to Harvard. He studies law. He and his wife Michelle are working for a Chicago law firm. And he's going to be a Democratic senator from Illinois starting in 1997 all the way to 2008. So he runs against Hillary Clinton during the Democratic primary. But eventually, she's going to join up with him, be his Secretary of State. So, yes, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State under Obama. Not only was she First Lady with her husband Bill Clinton, but now she is Secretary of State. He selects Joe Biden as his vice president. And in the subsequent election in 2012, he's going to run against John McCain and Sarah Palin and be elected again to a second term. So here are the key things that happened during Obama's presidency. Of course, he's the first African-American elected president, rather the first minority elected president, right? And so what he does to help with the economy, because remember, this guy's stepping into like the worst economic situation that we've seen since the Great Depression. He gets the ball rolling. The first thing passed is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So it's $700 billion to create new jobs, to save existing ones from going under, and to try to spur economic activity. So this is going to save a lot of big companies like GM, General Motors. So another thing that Obama is credited for as far as domestic policy is the Affordable Care Act. You guys have heard the slang term Obamacare. This is the same thing, okay? It's the Affordable Care Act. It expands Medicaid, essentially, and creates an insurance marketplace to help more Americans gain access to health insurance. So this is definitely opening up the doors for Americans to get health insurance. And another important thing that happens under his presidency is going to be the first Latina appointed to the Supreme Court, which is Sonia Sotomayor. So President Obama will appoint 2 women to the court. One of them is Sonia Sotomayor. The other one is Elena Kagan. So as far as foreign policy goes, the key event that we see here is the death of Osama bin Laden. Now, he's killed by SEAL Team 6 in a compound in Pakistan in 2011. And Obama didn't want to bomb the compound. Instead, he authorized a surgical raid where, the SEAL Team 6 is going to go in and just take people out. So this is the image of the cabinet watching this unfold right in front of them. So another major thing that happens in Obama's presidency is the expansion of the LGBT rights. And so President Obama gets rid of the policy don't ask, don't tell in the military. And now gays are allowed to openly serve in the military. Because before, you just didn't bring it up. That's kind of how it was suppressed. Because if it was brought up, you would be discharged. But now, allowed to openly serve. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act is also signed as well. This extends on the 1969 federal hate crime law. Now it includes attacks on people based on their sexual orientation, their perceived gender, and gender identity as well. And in Obergefell versus Hodges is a Supreme Court case that happens in 2015. Gay marriage is now seen as a fundamental human right because of this. So gay marriage is legal throughout the country. As far as gun control goes, there are major issues with gun control. One of the big things that we see as far as mass shootings goes is what happens at the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Because of this mass shooting that occurs here, Obama announces a series of sweeping gun control proposals, wants to bring in more extensive background checks, limit munition sales, ban armor-piercing bullets, and make harsher penalties for weapon traffickers. And another major thing that happens in Obama's presidency are foreign relations with Cuba actually thaw. Because by this point in time, remember, Nixon had opened the door with China and the Soviet Union. Vietnam, we had still had some trade relations with them. But now, Cuba, that was the final step. So, in 2013, Pope Francis advised the United States and Cuba to exchange prisoners as a gesture of goodwill to each other. And this kind of opened the door. Obama announced negotiation of regaining relations with Cuba in 2014. So in 2015, the U.S. formally has diplomatic relations with Cuba. They resume after 60 years of détente. We hadn't been in there since the 40s, practically in the early 50s. So Obama is the first president to visit Cuba since it turned to communism. And he's the first one to go there since Calvin Coolidge. So, relations with Cuba have improved. And that right there, guys, is pretty much all of the information we're going to cover. I know there's probably a couple more things, but dude, I'll get to it. So I want to tell you guys good luck on your EOC exams. Study my flashcards. Okay, I can't reiterate that enough. Study my flashcards. Sign up for my Quizlet class. Those of you guys in my class know what I'm talking about. You best do it. And it'll help you out for AP as well because I've got flashcard decks to help with AP. But anyways, guys, I know you can do this. And there will be tutorials if you guys need more help. So this is the last tired teacher lecture that you will hear for the school year. So I hope you guys learned a lot from me ranting and raving all school year. And I wish you the best of luck in the coming days with all of your AP exams and, of course, EOC. So let's rock this. All right, guys. I will talk to you in class. So, you guys have a good day. Bye, guys.